Part 3. do I clap?
Everyone!
Do you want to restart
We had to.
No, we didn't get that in.
Okay, we're going to talk about coinsurance. What is it? It is a provision that requires that the insured to insure the covered property to some specified amount of its value. It's typically 80, 90, or 100%, and in return for doing so, they get a rate credit. We'll go into what that means. It's basically a formula that comes into play. But if it basically at the time of loss, if the limits it determines if the limits that are carried are less than required by the provision, the amount that they'll pay is going to be determined by said formula, which we'll go through. It's important to note this only applies to a partial loss, not a full loss, not a blank loss, not a total loss. So, if in the event there's a total and complete loss, this formula does not apply. It only applies to partial losses. Okay. Why does it exist? I'm just going to run you through a quick example. You can read through this, but basically, let's say you take a 100,000 square foot warehouse and the insured goes, okay, there's a bunch of sprinklers, the fire department's right down the street. If a fire were to start, it's really not a good chance that the entire building's going to go, right? It could go, so I think at worst case scenario, I only think 50% of the building's going to go up. I'm only going to insure the building for 50% because I really think that that's my biggest exposure. Well, let's say he does that and he's right and there is a fire and only 50% goes up. Well, what half of the building is the insurance company actually insuring? Are they insuring the left half, the middle section, or the right half? They're actually taking on the entire exposure but collecting premium for half of the building, right? So it's one of those things that's in there to protect the insurance company from covering a larger exposure but only collecting a portion of the premium on it. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's the formula. The more complicated version, or the language, is it's limits of insurance divided by the limits of insurance required. So the limits of insurance on the policy divided by the limits of insurance required times the loss, and then minus the deductible, equals the loss recovery, or what they're going to pay for the claim. More commonly known to is did over should times the loss minus the deductible equals the payment. Okay? So we're going to run through a couple examples. So we're going to go through at 100% coinsurance, 90%, and 80% coinsurance. So let's say the replacement cost on the building is $1 million. And again, important to remember, we're not talking about if this building could sell on the market for $2 million, we're talking about the cost to replace this building, so the actual value of the building, not real estate value. So if it was $1 million and there was 100% coinsurance on it, the deductible is $500. Say that the limit of insurance that the insured actually purchased was $800,000, right? And the loss is $100,000. Take the $800,000 divided by the million times $100,000 minus the deductible. They are going to only get paid out $79,500, even though the loss was $100,000. So they're getting penalized basically 20 grand for underinsuring the building. Okay. Let's take the next one. Same exact scenario, but we're at 90% coinsurance. You have the $800,000 limit that they purchased over the $900,000 that they should have purchased, times $100,000 of a loss minus the deductible. Now it's costing them roughly $12,000 because they underinsured it. Last one, coinsurance at 80%. Building value still at $1 million. The limits of insurance are $800,000. So it's what they did, which was the $800,000 over what they should have, which is the $800,000 times the loss minus the deductible. Basically, they're getting paid the full amount of the loss minus the deductible, right? So those are kind of examples of how the formula works. Just again, when you're thinking in your head, did over should times the loss. I mean, minus the deductible too, but the deductible is gonna be usually such a small portion of it, so you can think did over should minus, or times the loss is really what it's gonna be. One way to basically effectively cancel out the coinsurance formula or penalty is you can have what's called agreed value. It voids out the coinsurance, and basically it states that the requirements of the insurance have been met by the amount shown on the policy. So the insurers will require a statement of values. Appraisals need to be done on the value of the building, and they typically need to be done every year. It's not common that a lot of our clients have it. I think we have a few clients that have an agreed value, but it's pretty rare, and it does need to be revisited every year with the values. Does that make sense how that would, this completely takes out the whole penalty, okay? So you can have an agreed value to bring it in. So that was the last portion of what we needed to talk about in property. Just a few things now, we're just gonna go through things that you might see on the broadening form, what the quotes are gonna look like, where you can find some information, and on a proposal as well. So, this is the broadening form for Liberty Mutual. I don't know what you can see on there, but there's miscellaneous thrown coverages, again, like we talked about, electronic data is thrown in there. Employee dishonesty, if a bookkeeper is, funneling money out of the company, things like that. One of the ones on here, newly acquired or newly constructed, before they tell us that they get it added to the policy, there is some limits thrown in there for those. Again, personal property of others, they'll throw in a $25,000 limit. So there's some of these coverages that we need to check in the broadening form that we may not need to have the insurance pay twice for, because they're already getting it included in this broadening form. So that's one example there for the Liberty one. Now let's go through, for instance, a Liberty quote, where you can find some of this information. Let's see, where would we? Okay. So again, we're personal property. We can see the limit that we have here. There is no agreed value, so there is a coinsurance of 90%. The deductible, again, things that we just talked about. The valuation, this is property, so we're at replacement cost, which is great. There's no wind and hail because it's not going to be applicable out here. And then we can go to the next section, which is personal property of others. Again, this is a telecom contractor, so they have it, they carry satellite dishes of other people that they hold at their location. So they have a limit of $515,000. Again, deductible, co-insurance, all the same things apply. We have business income and extra expense, the limit of $250,000. The co-insurance applies there as well. And then this is their, if you go down here, it's their extension form that we just kind of looked at briefly. That includes a lot of those things. I think that's pretty much, again, then that just goes into inland marine. So that's what Liberties look like, and again, we're just gonna go through Liberty and NIF because those are the vast majority of the property quotes that we'll see. So NIF's going to have two forms similar to how they have with the auto, where they've got the one quote page and then the one that breaks it down a little bit more in detail. But here's their section. So this is their business income and extra expense that they charge. This is their coverage for the building, their personal property. I don't think they have any personal property of others unless it's an endorsement. And so it's just a small little chunk that they have in the quote, which is why you need to go into their second part. to find out really all the details of NIS property. So it'll have the locations specified there for the premises, and then the various different limits that we have included by location for the buildings, business income, extra expense, personal property, all of that kind of broken down here. And then it looks like just even further as you go down. So you just kind of have to dig through these things. Here's where the deductibles would be. You got to dig through these forms to find out where everything would be, but most of the quotes should lay it out where the deductibles, all of the limits, co-insurance, things like that you'll be able to find. You just want to become familiar with them so you know where to find them.
Is that written on a blanket basis?
I imagine
Yes.
this NIS would be, yeah.
And real quick, I'm just gonna add this so we don't forget. The business income portion. Don't take for granted that we've got the right amount of business income coverage there. If we have an example of Vintage Design, which has a sister company, Newa Design, they actually are now gonna be housed in one building, and they're having manufacturing that's gonna take place on site with $1 million worth of equipment or more that they have to order from Germany. So $1 million limit for a company like Newa Design is not sufficient if they go down for 6 months. So what happens is, you have to think, if our company, our client has manufacturing in their facility, you have to ask the question, if that unit goes down, can you get something easily, or do you have to order it? What's the lag time? What's the amount of sales you would have done in that lag time? What's the payroll associated during that entire window? So just anytime you've got a client, cabinet manufacturer, or even some sheet metal contractors will do work on-site, although most do it off-site now, just be aware that you've got to ask the business income questions because there is an exposure.
And then lastly, we'll just take a look at our proposal and where you can find the same information on our proposal. Again, effective date, carrier and best, and the named insured. We also have a named insured schedule so you can see any further ones. The locations will list. The limits, again, business and personal property, which are blanketed, which my dad mentioned. The business income and extra expense. And then, so we also have attached statement of values. And then you can go down a little bit further. And you can see that, again, the valuation is replacement cost, and then the deductibles that are associated with each. I think there's probably a little bit more on this next page. And then here are the statement of values that you'll find here, as well as business income limits. This one is a little bit more complex, so probably most of our accounts you'll just have the one page listed, but this is a larger account, so you have a lot more limits and contents listed by location, and then the blanket total values. So that's briefly where you can find that information on our proposal when you're explaining it to an insured.
So let's stop there. So everybody look at that schedule. See the building right there? So Monica, if on location number 2, there was a loss, right? And the loss was $2.5 million instead of $1.9 million, would the guy get paid? Look at building number 2 up
Do
there.
I need to notice co-insurances?
Huh?
Do I need to?
No, I'm asking you, if they had a $2.5 million loss right now in that building.
Do I only get the 1.9?
Anybody else?
Blanketed, so it's the full amount, up to
So
6
so
million.
you could apply up to $6 million on that building.
Oh, okay.
And that's the advantage of, and the reason insurance companies do it is if you have buildings all over in different spots, the likelihood of them going down is pretty slim. So anytime you have a multi-location, you want to try to blanket, and then you can apply those values to just different locations.
So what if 2 of those 6 you exceed the limit, so you're at 6.356? You're done then, right, for the year. If you had another loss later in that year, so let's say building 6 goes down after building 2, 3, and 4 went down that exceeded the 6 0.4 million. Are you
So you're saying if there was a second loss,
right with a blanket?
right? Let's assume hypothetically, let's take location number 2. It burns down. That's a $6 million loss. Okay?
Right.
That value has been utilized now, right? So, I mean, you're lucky if they're not gonna cancel you. But in essence, you still have $6 million on your policy. You still got the coverage.
It's not, what he's saying, it's not
It's not a
a diminishing,
limit.
it's not a diminishing limit like that.
Okay. Okay.
Is that why it says building number 1 on every single one, because it's blanketed?
No,
No.
that's just location number 1, building number 1.
So they're all buildings?
So you can have a
They're all
location, you
different,
can have a
like
property,
multiple buildings.
yeah, you have a property location with multiple buildings, it's still one location but multiple buildings.
And so many times when you got one location with multiple buildings, you think about the buildings, but the personal property, a lot of times is switched from one building to another building, and that stuff moves around all the time. So you always want a blanket personal property as well.
What's EQSL?
Earthquake, sprinkler, leakage.
Question about it?
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you determine like how to properly give your client the options between the different co-insurance? Anywhere from the 80% to 100%. I mean, what's the cost difference? Because obviously you're weighing that all out, but like, what's the thought process in weighing that out? Like, what would be the difference between, I think this one was 90% cost-wise versus the 80 and the 100? Like, is it that much of a difference?
It can be depending on how large you get to it. Lauren, do you remember on vintage what it would be at all if you've gotten different options?
Because this one was 90, and I think the policy
I
was
think
like
the carriers just give it to
88,000.
you.
Typically, the carriers, you,
Yeah, they have
Yeah,
requirements that,
well, typically, like a Liberty or any of these companies, they don't wanna do anything less than 90% co-insurance. Maybe you can get an exception and do 80, but it's gonna cost you a premium to do it. So it's, back in the day, we could get it with 80% co-insurance more readily. But now what I do is I just discuss with the client and say, look, we wanna make sure we estimate this properly, what's, cost per square foot, look in the area, and update this on a, fairly regular basis.
Yeah.
So, I would say, the bigger question is, do I really want them to have 80% co-insurance? No, I'd really spend the time focusing on making sure they properly insured to 100%, even though it's 90% co-insurance on there.
Yeah.
Versus screwing around with the rate breaks, because in general, more than likely, there's gonna be a total loss. So let's give an example that happens in the real world now. Half the building burns down. Well, let's say you're in the city of Laguna Beach. Laguna Beach is going to say, we're gonna tear down the whole thing. So now, even though only half your building's gone, it's still gonna cost you limits.
Yeah.
So it's in our insured's best interest to make sure we fully insure it and not screw around in the co-insurance world,
Yeah.
other than taking the 90%.
And the truth is on contractors, what happens, 95% of them have partial losses. You have a concrete tilt-up building, right? And the building catches on fire. The walls stay, the foundation stays, the only thing that burns is the roof structure and everything inside. So these guys always think, they know this whole place isn't gonna go down, they throw some, crazy amount at you. But what happens on a contractor is, when you see that there's a loss, the inside gets burned out, the roof goes down, but the walls are fine.
Yeah.
Foundation's fine. So you have partial losses, so you always just have to watch that co-insurance.
And unless he's an expert on the ordinances of that particular city and what's coming down the line, because we see new ordinances all the time. And what was required 2 years ago versus what's required now, we have to guess right that the ordinance will not change down the road. And since this is California, we just know it's always gonna get more restrictive.
Yeah.
And the ordinances are crazy. I owned a building in Irvine, which had 2 floors. And we had bathrooms for both floors. But I put a private bathroom in my office, right? City of Irvine didn't want to approve it because it wasn't wheelchair accessible.
Well,
For
was
my
it that or
private
the fact
office.
that you had a shower in there too?
No, and a closet. No, they, you know, and I had to go battle them to say, look, this is for me, nobody else, you know. And finally, but you know, sometimes you have to, you know, I remember them coming in and the inspector taking a tape measure to the urinal, which was a long urinal, and he said it's too low or too high, and the plumber had to yank it out, either increase it up or down. You know, it's a long one, it's not gonna make any difference, right? But this is the city of Irvine, and you either do it or you don't get approved.
But one last thing to touch on with your 80, 90, 100, where they kind of danced around it, but to be specific is, if you're at 80% and the building is $1 million, and they've only insured it to 80%, which is 800,000, right? And there's a total loss, they've underinsured themselves,
Yeah.
right? And they're gonna be out the 200,000. That's why, even though we know we're talking about the 90, Justin's talking about, well, we really want them to insure the total value, you know? Because if there is a total loss, we don't want them coming back and going, well,
I don't know. Yeah.
And you know, keep in mind that property coverage, especially building coverage, is very inexpensive.
Yep.
It's not a big cost item, so you insure it properly. The bigger problem's on the personal property side.
cool. Any other questions? Everyone get the idea of the co-insurance formula? Cool. Thanks, guys.